So, as you know, this is the final sermon of our 2020 Vision series. And over the course of this series, we have been exploring different church leaders and their unique vision for the church and hope for the world. And so this far, we've talked about Jesus, Martin Luther King, Apostle Paul, Mother Teresa, and today, the fifth and final leader that we will be discussing is John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. And we will remember today his unique vision for the church and his hope for the world. And our sermon today will be in two parts. Part 1, John Wesley and a new frontier of faith. 4,000 miles, 285 years ago, a man named John Wesley was ordained at age 22 by the Church of England and was living in Oxford, England, when he heard God's voice saying to him, "Take up my courage, lean into the unknown, come and pioneer with me, for I am behind the unseen and I am in the unknown." In the midst of what seemed like a very clear path of ministry in England, John Wesley was surprised by God when he felt God calling him out west to the new frontier of faith in America. John Wesley heard God's calling in his own words to, quote, "spread scriptural holiness across the land," end quote. So God's vision of this leads John Wesley to sail into the unknown, very literally. In 1735, a long time ago, he and his brother Charles Wesley, who wrote many of the hymns we're singing today, they boarded a ship and they set sail for the British colony of Georgia in America. And after a very long 3-month perilous journey over the seas of the Atlantic, they finally make it to shore and he steps out into a brave new world. A world that was very different than the one he knew in England. Sometimes we forget that, don't we? Those of us who know about John Wesley, we forget that he was literally a Western pioneer. John Wesley had a sense that in this unknown future of America, there was an enormous opportunity for Christian transformation. There was an opportunity for a metamorphosis of the church, where a new iteration of the Christian community could begin. He saw it as a new opportunity for faithful exploration. So John Wesley literally and theologically left behind the Church of England, which at that time was hierarchical, elitist, controlled by magistrates, and in his opinion preached the good news but did not live by it. Wesley believed that now was the moment in history at his time for a new kind of faithful living, something he called holy living. And he believed God's movement couldn't be contained in just a church. And the Holy Spirit wasn't just gifted to a priest. And the reign of God could not just be limited to one parish. No. John Wesley declared boldly for history to hear, "The world is my parish." In his journal in 1739, he wrote, "I look upon all the world as my parish. Thus far, I mean that in whatever part of it, it is my duty to declare unto all that are willing to hear the glad tidings of salvation." John Wesley had a vision that all God's people might experience God's presence and the gift of the Holy Spirit. It was this theological idea, which was new at the time, called the priesthood of all believers. to one another in the love and power of Christ. In his own words, he said this: "I continue to dream and pray about a revival of holiness in our day that moves forth in mission and creates authentic community in which each person can be unleashed through the empowerment of the Spirit to fulfill God's creational intentions." The language is different than what we use, but it reminds us of our theology, yes? What we believe. So he took this new model, this new method, into this new world. And in the late 1760s, Methodist societies began to pop up all over America. This was a grassroots movement, essentially. And people did not meet in ornate churches, but they met in homes, in fields, in libraries. And we know the rest of the story, right? That this early Methodist movement grew like wildfire. And in a mere 100 years, listen to this, in a mere 100 years, the Methodist movement became the largest Christian denomination in America, with an estimated 3,800,000 members in America alone. 3 million. In 1860, there was the same number of Methodist ministers as U.S. postal employees. And the treasury of the Methodist movement equaled the federal budget of the time. It was just enormous. And all of this happened after he took a leap of faith and stepped out onto the new frontier. Of course, John Wesley didn't see all of this with his own eyes, but he charted the course that would endure. He took a leap of faith and blazed a trail of God's love for a new frontier of faith. As Methodists, and specifically I would argue as Californian Methodists, we have the same kind of pioneering spirit in our DNA. So the call today is to summon it, to remember it, to use the same kind of inspiring conviction in the lives of our faith and in the idea of church. As we end this series, I want to take time to share with you personally as pastor how I believe that this pioneering spirit of Wesley must inform our ministry as we move forward in 2020. Part 2, Methodists and the New Frontier of Faith. 2,000 miles away, 5 years ago, I too heard God's voice calling me, saying, "Lean into your courage. Lean into the unknown. Come and pioneer with me." You know my story, most of you, some of you do not. I was perfectly satisfied in my life and ministry in Nashville, Tennessee. That's where I'm originally from. A place in the South where the institution of church is inextricably woven into the cultural fabric. When you meet people in Nashville, Tennessee, you ask where they live, where they work, and what church they go to. Because that is a given. There's a mega church on every corner. And if I had stayed in the South, I would have pastored and served our home church of 5,000 members. Big churches. But in the midst of what seemed to be a very clear path, God surprised me and called me to the West, a new frontier of faith. Unlike the rest of America, the West is now, in large part, a post-religious society. Church, in a traditional sense, has lost the appeal to many under the age of 30. Church used to be, many of you remember, the third place. People would go to work, they'd go home, they'd go to church, the third place. But for the next generation, this new generation, my generation, the third place has become the coffee shop, the bar, the boutique gym. And the truth is, we in the West are simply 20 to 30 years into the future of what inevitably will happen across the United States. Indeed, as this new generation ages, we will become a post-religious, post-institutional society. But here is the catch that I hope you hear, that this rising generation may not be interested in institutions, particularly in the institution of church. But this new generation is interested in spirituality. You know this millennial catchphrase, right? People saying, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. Yeah? Because there is a thirst for the undercurrents of faith, spiritual development, social justice, love, and mercy. There is a deep desire to connect with our Creator God, but just in a brand new way, a brand new format. It's this new opportunity for faith exploration that fueled my desire to come out west. I saw the unknown future as an enormous opportunity for Christian transformation, where a metamorphosis of the church can begin, where a new iteration of Christian community could take place. Although most would describe a religious decline and death, I saw and believe in a new opportunity for new life and new birth. One of my favorite quotes from John Wesley, I've quoted it before so it might sound familiar, is this. He said this in the later years of his life. He said, I'm not afraid that people called Methodists should ever cease to exist, either in Europe or America. But I am afraid lest they should only exist as a dead sect, having the form of religion without the power. And this undoubtedly will be the case, unless they hold fast both to doctrine, spirit, and discipline with which they first set out. It's powerful because it's true. Today, I knew that God was calling me into this same kind of pioneering spirit of Wesley, into faithful innovation. I knew that God was calling me to the California-Nevada Conference, where church leaders are not adamant of holding on to the past, but are ready and willing to embrace the future, to create new models of church, a new method. I did not want to invest in a world that was disappearing. I wanted to use my life for ministry that was adaptive, adventurous, so that I might contribute, that we might contribute to a thriving and transformational Christian community. I knew that I must leave the known for the unknown glory of the Lord, and so I took that leap of faith. And I pray to this day that God would use us to blaze a trail with God's love for a new frontier. Today, as we close our series, I want to express to you that this is not just my personal hope, but I believe this is the hope at the heart of our church. Yesterday, we had our gathering of leaders, and we heard this refrain that we have worked so hard to get to this point. We have worked hard at articulating who we are, our mission, our vision, our discipleship strategy. You heard Jennifer talk about we've worked hard to get financially stable celebrating a balanced budget and a healthy endowment. We've worked hard to get the right leaders in place. And yesterday at our leadership summit, we proclaimed that we are ready for a new future in 2020. We're ready to rise and raise up new leaders in new ways. So this year in 2020, we are committed to reaching out in faith to a new demographic of seekers, focusing on 0 to 20, children and youth of Modesto, and focusing on 20 to 40, the young leaders of Modesto. To do this, we are realigning our ministries and some of our church structure to enable mobility and availability to do this. I know with all of these pieces in place, we are ready to move into God's future together. I know we will live faithfully in our Wesleyan pioneering spirit, and in so doing, see the revival of a new Methodist movement to spread scriptural holiness, God's love, in a brand new way here in Modesto. Amen.